The rain came softly that evening, brushing against the windows like a shy visitor. The house was quiet except for the gentle notes of a piano. Emma sat there in her blue sweater, her hair tied up, her fingers moving over the keys without energy. She wasn't really playing for joy anymore. She was playing because silence had become too heavy to sit with. The melody she played was one her husband Daniel used to love. A song they had danced to once on their wedding anniversary. The tune was beautiful, full of hope and warmth. But tonight it sounded tired, slow, and lonely. Daniel had been away for nearly 3 months now. His job as an architect had sent him across the country. And though he promised to call every night, the calls had become shorter, his voice distracted, sometimes fading into long silences. Emma didn't blame him at first. She told herself he was tired. She told herself love could survive distance if the heart stayed honest. But the heart, she was learning, could grow lonely even in love. Her father, Richard, lived with her now. He had moved in after Emma's mother passed away the year before. He tried to fill the house with life again, fixing things, cooking, watering the garden. But nothing truly filled the space Daniel had left. Richard had always been a quiet man. He had loved Emma's mother deeply, and losing her had aged him in ways that didn't show in his hair or face. Only in his eyes. Those eyes often watched his daughter with quiet worry. He could sense her sadness, even when she smiled. That night, he stood at the door and watched her play. The soft light of the lamp fell across her face, making her look like a painting of someone who had lost a dream, but still hoped it might return. "Still playing that one," he said, his voice gentle, trying to sound casual. Emma smiled faintly and nodded. "It keeps me company," she replied. Her words trembled a little. She didn't want to cry. Not again, not in front of him. Richard walked closer and rested a hand on her shoulder. The music faded, replaced by the steady sound of rain. "You've always loved this song," he said. Emma nodded, her eyes fixed on the piano keys. "It reminds me of Daniel," she whispered. "The night before he left, he asked me to play it for him. He said it made him feel home." She laughed softly, but the laugh was heavy. "I don't know if he still feels that way," Richard didn't answer. He just stood there for a moment, his thumb brushing her shoulder in quiet comfort. He had been married long enough to know what distance could do to two people. And though he wanted to tell her everything would be fine, he couldn't find the words. Because deep down, he wasn't sure. When he finally left the room, Emma sat still for a long time, staring at the piano. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the glossy black wood. She touched the keys again, but this time no sound came. The rain grew heavier outside. The world dimmed, and she felt smaller inside the wide silence of her house. The next afternoon, while Emma was out in the garden, trying to trim the roses her mother had planted years ago, the wind blew the old fence gate open. It had been loose for weeks, and when she tried to fix it, the latch came off completely. Just as she sighed, a voice came from next door. "Looks like that gate finally gave up." She turned to see Michael, her neighbor, standing by the hedge with a friendly smile. He was in his early 30s, around her age, tall, with a gentle face and the kind of calm energy that made you feel safe. He worked as a carpenter, often seen repairing things around his porch or fixing his old truck. "Need a hand?" he asked, already stepping over the low garden border before she could refuse. Emma hesitated but nodded. "If you don't mind," she said. He grabbed his toolbox and within minutes, they were working together, talking easily, laughing once or twice when the wind messed up her hair or when the hammer slipped. It had been a long time since she had laughed like that. When the fence was fixed, she offered him lemonade. They sat on the porch while the late sun painted everything gold. The air smelled of rain and roses. And something about that moment felt comforting, familiar. Like breathing after holding your breath for too long. Michael told her he had moved to the neighborhood a year ago after his divorce. "Sometimes, fixing things keeps me from thinking too much," he said with a small grin. Emma smiled. "I know what you mean," she replied. They talked about little things. Music, work, the weather. But beneath those simple words, there was a quiet connection growing, unspoken yet real. When the sun went down, Michael stood to leave. "Thanks for the lemonade," he said. "And for letting me help," Emma smiled again. "Thank you for fixing the fence," she said softly. As he walked away, she caught herself watching him a moment too long. It wasn't attraction. Not yet. It was something more innocent. A kind of warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. That night, she sat by the piano again, her fingers brushing the same keys. But this time, the song didn't feel as heavy. It sounded almost alive again. And though she didn't want to admit it, she knew why. The next few days passed quickly. Michael would wave when he saw her, sometimes stop by to ask if she needed anything. He fixed her mailbox one afternoon, helped her move a flower pot the next. Richard noticed it too. He watched from the kitchen window as his daughter smiled again, her laughter returning in small pieces. But something inside him began to worry, not because he didn't trust her, but because he recognized that look in her eyes. He had seen it once before, in himself years ago, when he'd felt lonely in his own marriage and found comfort in someone else's company. He never acted on it, but he remembered how easy it was for loneliness to disguise itself as friendship. One evening, as the sky turned pink and the first stars began to show, Emma played the piano again. The song was softer now, slower. Her heart caught between memory and something new. Richard came in quietly, standing in the same spot as before. Watching her, she didn't see him at first. She was lost in thought. The name, Michael, flickering somewhere in her mind. When she finished playing, she turned and saw her father. He smiled faintly, but his eyes were serious. "You play better when you're thinking about someone," he said. Trying to sound teasing, Emma blushed and looked down. "It's just music," she said quickly, but her voice gave her away. Richard didn't press her. He simply nodded. "Music always tells the truth," he said quietly, then turned to leave. But his words stayed with her long after he left the room. That night, Emma sat in bed, staring at her phone. Daniel had sent a short text. "Sorry, busy again tonight. Talk soon." She typed a reply but erased it 3 times. Her chest felt heavy. She thought of Michael's laugh, his kind eyes, the way he listened. She thought of Daniel's distance, the silence between their calls. When she finally put her phone down, she felt tears in her eyes. She didn't know what she wanted anymore. Forgiveness. Attention, love, maybe just to be seen again, outside. The rain began to fall again, soft and steady. The piano stood silent in the dark living room, and somewhere deep inside her heart, something began to shift. It wasn't love, not yet. But it was a feeling strong enough to scare her, and strong enough to make her forget. Just for a moment. The promise she had made the day Daniel left, that she would wait for him. No matter how long it took, in that quiet house, filled with music and memories. Emma didn't realize that the smallest moments, a laugh, a look, a kindness, were slowly leading her toward a choice that would change everything. And when her father walked past her door before going to bed, he paused for a moment, listening to her breathing through the half-open door. He sighed softly and whispered to himself, "She's slipping," before turning off the hallway light. Downstairs, the piano waited, still and patient. The same song that began their love now held the echo of something else. Something fragile and dangerous. The story of infidelity had not yet begun. but its shadow had already fallen across the music. And as the night deepened, Emma dreamt of two voices, one familiar and fading, one new and near, and somewhere between them. Her heart trembled, unsure of which one truly called her home. The weeks after that rainy evening moved quickly. The days grew colder, and Emma found herself slipping into a quiet routine. Morning coffee, short calls from Daniel, and then the long afternoons that stretched endlessly between sunlight and silence. It was during those hours that Michael's voice often drifted over from next door, sometimes calling out a greeting, sometimes offering to help with small things. And though she always said she was fine, she didn't stop him when he walked over. He started fixing little things around the house. The mailbox hinge, the loose garden light, the broken step on the porch. Emma told him he didn't have to, but he only smiled and said, "I like keeping busy." That line, simple as it was, stuck with her, because she understood it too well. Keeping busy was another way to keep from feeling lonely. One afternoon, Emma baked a small apple pie. It wasn't anything special, just something to fill the house with a sweet smell. When she noticed Michael sanding a chair outside, she walked over with 2 slices. He laughed, surprised but grateful. "You didn't have to," he said. "I wanted to," she replied softly. They sat on the porch, the pie between them, talking about ordinary things, the weather, the neighborhood, the books they liked. It was easy, almost too easy, and in that ease, something gentle started to grow. For the first time in months, Emma felt seen. Michael listened without glancing at his phone. He remembered the small things she said, like how her mother loved lilacs or how Daniel hated being away from home in the winter. When she spoke, he looked at her as if her words mattered. That simple attention warmed her in ways she hadn't expected. Evenings began to change when Daniel called. Emma tried to sound cheerful, but her voice always carried a small distance. He talked about work, about deadlines, about meetings, but never about her. Never about them. Sometimes the calls ended before she could say goodnight. Sometimes they didn't come at all. One night, after dinner, Emma sat on the porch alone. The air was cool and soft, crickets humming in the distance. She saw a light flicker from Michael's house, and soon he stepped out with a mug of coffee. "Can't sleep?" he called out. She shook her head. "You?" He smiled faintly. "Same." He walked over and handed her the mug. "It's too strong," he said, "but it keeps me awake." She laughed. And for a while they just sat quietly. The moonlight made everything pale and calm. And when he started humming an old song, she recognized it. A melody her mother used to play. "You know that one?" she asked, surprised. "Yeah," he said. "My mum loved it too." That moment felt almost unreal. 2 people connected by memories they hadn't planned to share. When their eyes met, there was something there, not desire. Not yet, but understanding. A shared ache that neither of them named. Time slipped by without notice. Days turned into weeks, and soon, Michael was part of her days in ways that felt natural. He helped her fix a leaking pipe. He brought over books, sometimes even dinner. Richard saw it all quietly. Watching from a distance, his worry deepened. He had known love in all its shapes. Young, old, faithful, and broken. And he could see the one forming here was dangerous. One evening he decided to speak. Emma was setting the table when he said, "You've been seeing a lot of Michael lately." His tone wasn't accusing, just careful. She looked up quickly. "He's just a friend," she said. Richard nodded slowly. "Friends are good, but be sure you know where the line is," she frowned. "Dad, it's not like that," he smiled sadly. I hope not. His words lingered in her mind that night. She told herself he was overthinking it, that she wasn't doing anything wrong. Yet, when she caught her reflection in the mirror later, she saw a softness in her face, the kind that comes from being thought of, being seen. A few days later, Daniel called again. His tone was hurried. Hey, listen. The project's delayed. I'll have to stay another month. She paused, her throat dry. Another month, he sighed. I'm sorry, it's just complicated right now. She forced a smile he couldn't see. It's okay. I understand. After they hung up, she stared at the phone for a long time, her chest heavy with the weight of waiting. That night, she walked out to the porch again. The wind was strong, leaves rushing across the ground. Michael was there too, cleaning up his tools. She called out softly, Michael? He turned, surprised but smiling. Hey, what are you doing out so late? Just needed air, she said. He walked over, wiping his hands. You okay? She hesitated and said, Daniel's staying longer, Her voice cracked a little, and before she could stop herself, she felt tears rising. Michael looked at her quietly, then said, You don't have to be strong all the time, you know. Those words undid her. She shook her head, trying to hold back tears. I'm fine, she whispered, but he gently said, No, you're not. The wind blew between them. Her hair brushed across her face, and when he reached out to tuck it behind her ear, she didn't move. The world felt still. Their hearts too loud, their eyes too close. But then, something broke the moment, the sound of footsteps inside. Richard's voice calling softly, Emma, are you outside? She stepped back instantly, her cheeks burning. Yeah, Dad. Coming in, she said quickly. Michael nodded, stepping away, his face unreadable inside. Richard saw her flustered face and the tears she tried to hide. He didn't say anything right away, but his silence spoke volumes. Later, as she washed the dishes, he finally said, You know, sometimes loneliness makes us reach for things we don't really want. His voice was soft, not judging, just tired. But it always costs more than we think. She froze, her hands still in the sink, water running over them. She wanted to defend herself, but her throat closed up. Instead, she just whispered, I know. The next day, she didn't see Michael. He didn't come by, didn't wave, didn't call out from the fence. The absence stung more than she expected. She went about her day in silence, the house too quiet again. Richard noticed but said nothing. He just watched her walk through the rooms like a ghost, her heart caught somewhere between regret and longing. By the third day, she saw him again. Standing by his truck, he waved, but it was a small, uncertain wave. Hi, she said, walking closer. Haven't seen you. Been busy, he replied, but his smile was faint. I didn't want to cause any trouble, Emma looked down, guilt twisting in her chest. You didn't, she said softly. It's just complicated. He nodded. I know. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said, I think I should give you some space. And before she could answer, he got into his truck and drove off. That night, Emma played the piano again. The same song as before, but slower, broken in places. Richard sat in the next room, listening quietly. He didn't interrupt. He knew she was saying goodbye through the notes, saying goodbye to something that never fully began but had already left a mark. The music drifted through the house, heavy with emotion. Emma's eyes blurred with tears as her hands moved over the keys. She thought about Daniel, his smile, his promises. the love that still existed somewhere between them, and she thought about Michael, the man who reminded her what it felt like to be noticed. When the last note faded, the house was silent again. Richard walked in slowly, sat beside her, and said only one thing. "Don't lose yourself trying to fill someone else's absence." She nodded, tears falling freely now. "I think I already did," she whispered. He put a hand on her back and stayed with her until she stopped crying. The night outside was calm again. The rain had passed, but the air still smelled of something bittersweet upstairs, in her room. Emma looked out the window toward Michael's dark house. The porch light was off. No sound, no movement. She whispered softly to herself, "Good night," even though she knew he wouldn't hear. And in that whisper, she let go, not just of him, but of the part of herself that had been lost in the quiet hunger for attention. The story wasn't over. Not yet. Daniel would come home soon, and with him would come the truth she could no longer bury. But for now, she sat by the window, eyes heavy, heart aching, hoping that somewhere in the spaces between guilt and forgiveness, she might still find a way to feel whole again. Downstairs, Richard turned off the light and glanced once more toward her door. His heart was heavy, but he also knew that sometimes pain teaches what peace cannot. And as he went to bed, the sound of distant thunder echoed faintly outside. The storm had passed, but its mark remained, just like the memory of the neighbor and the night that changed everything forever. The winter sun came late that morning, shining weakly through the curtains of Emma's quiet house. The piano stood untouched, its keys gathering dust. The air felt still, heavy with things unspoken. It had been 2 weeks since she last saw Michael. 2 weeks of silence that somehow felt louder than their conversations ever had. She told herself it was for the best. She needed to focus on her marriage, on her life, on what was left of the promises she had made. Every morning she checked her phone, waiting for a message from Daniel. But the days passed without one. The distance between them had grown into something neither of them talked about. It wasn't anger or betrayal that hurt the most. It was the quietness, the slow fading of what once felt unbreakable. Still, she tried to hold on. She cooked his favorite meals, even if no one was there to eat them. She played their song once, only to stop halfway when her heart began to ache. Richard noticed everything. He said little, but his eyes followed her with concern. He had seen this kind of sorrow before, not dramatic, not loud, but slow and consuming. It was the kind of pain that made people forget who they were. He wished he could take it from her, but he knew some lessons had to be faced alone. Then one Friday afternoon, the sound of a car engine broke the silence. Emma looked out the window and froze. Daniel's silver sedan rolled up the driveway. Her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected him for another week. Her hands trembled as she opened the door. And there he was, tired, unshaven, eyes weary but kind, holding a bouquet of white lily. "Surprise," he said, his voice soft but unsure. She smiled faintly. Unable to speak, he stepped inside. Dropping his suitcase near the door, the smell of rain followed him, familiar and strange at the same time. "I missed you," he said, his words careful, as if testing the air. "I missed you too," she replied, but the words felt small. They sat together at the kitchen table. The air between them was filled with the weight of everything unspoken. Daniel talked about his project, about long days and late nights, about how he couldn't wait to come home. Emma listened, nodding, but her heart was tangled in guilt. Every time he smiled, it hurt a little more that evening. Richard came downstairs and greeted Daniel warmly. "Good to have you home, son," he said. Daniel hugged him with real affection, grateful for the comfort of something familiar. Good to be home, he replied. His eyes then turned to Emma, and for a moment, it almost felt like nothing had gone wrong. But truth has a way of waiting, patient and quiet, until the moment it needs to be heard. After dinner, Daniel unpacked his things while Emma washed the dishes. Her hands moved automatically, her mind racing. The image of Michael's face flashed in her thoughts, his words, his kindness. And then the look on her father's face that night. Disappointment mixed with understanding. She couldn't hide anymore, not from herself, not from Daniel. The weight of pretending was too heavy. She walked into the living room where Daniel sat, reading something on his tablet. Her voice trembled as she said, "Daniel, can we talk?" He looked up immediately. "Of course," he said. Setting the device aside for a moment, she just stood there. The words caught in her throat. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. "There's something I need to tell you," she began. He frowned slightly, sensing her fear. "What is it?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I made a mistake," she said quietly. Daniel's expression shifted. Confusion first, then realization. "A mistake?" He repeated slowly. "What kind of mistake?" She tried to explain, her voice shaking. "While you were away, I got close to someone. I didn't plan it. I didn't mean for it to happen, but I let it." The words tumbled out in pieces, her hands trembling as she spoke. It never went too far, but it shouldn't have gone anywhere at all. Daniel sat perfectly still, his face unreadable. The sound of the clock ticking filled the silence between them. "Who?" he asked finally, his tone quiet but sharp. "Our neighbor, Michael," she whispered. He stood up, the chair scraping softly against the floor. He didn't shout, didn't accuse, but his silence cut deeper than anger ever could. He walked to the window, staring out into the night. His shoulders tense, Emma took a step toward him. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I was lonely and He turned around, his eyes wet but steady. "You were lonely. And I wasn't here," he said, not as a question but a truth. "I left you alone too long." His words surprised her. She had expected blame, but instead, there was sorrow. Not just for what she did, but for what they had both lost. Richard, who had been upstairs, came halfway down the stairs when he heard their voices. He stopped, listening quietly, not wanting to intrude but unable to walk away. Daniel took a deep breath and said, "I can't pretend this doesn't hurt." Emma nodded. "Crying now, I know. But," he continued, "I also can't pretend that I didn't play a part in it." She looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" He sighed. "I've been so focused on work, on success, I forgot why I was doing it. I thought providing was enough. But I wasn't really here." Emma covered her face, the weight of guilt pressing down. "I don't deserve your kindness," she whispered. Daniel walked closer, his voice low. "Maybe not right now, but we can find our way back. If we both want to." Richard stepped quietly into the room then, his voice calm but firm. "Both of you have been hurting in silence," he said. "Maybe now's the time to start talking instead." They both turned to him, surprised but grateful for his presence. He looked at Emma. "The hardest part of love isn't staying faithful. It's staying honest." The room fell silent again. But it wasn't the same kind of silence anymore. This one carried understanding. That night, Daniel slept in the guest room. Not out of anger, but because they both needed space. Emma sat by the piano again. Her fingers hesitated over the keys, then began to play, the same melody, the same song that had followed her through every mistake, every memory. Daniel stood in the hallway, Listening quietly, the music was soft, almost like an apology, and though he didn't step inside, he stayed until the song ended. The next morning he made coffee for both of them. They sat together without words for a while, letting the small sound of the coffee maker fill the silence. Finally, Daniel said, "If we're going to move forward, we have to start over. No pretending, no distance." Emma nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said. He looked at her, his eyes tired but sincere. "Then let's try." In the days that followed, they began to rebuild, slowly, cautiously, like learning a language they once knew. Daniel started working from home more often, helping around the house, joining her for evening walks. Emma deleted Michael's number, blocked his messages, and stopped glancing toward the fence that separated their homes. Richard watched quietly as small signs of healing appeared. Laughter over breakfast, a touch on the shoulder, a shared cup of tea. They weren't perfect, but they were trying. And sometimes that was enough. One afternoon, while watering the garden, Emma saw Michael walking toward his truck. He noticed her too and raised a small wave. She returned it politely, a quiet smile. No words exchanged, no regret left, just understanding. Then he drove away, and she turned back to her flowers, letting the sunlight warm her face. That evening, Daniel joined her at the piano. "Teach me the song," he said. Smiling softly, she laughed, surprised. "You hate playing. Maybe it's time to learn," he said. She placed his hands on the keys, guiding him through the first few notes. The sound was clumsy, uneven, but real, as the melody filled the room. Emma felt a tear roll down her cheek, not of sadness, but of something closer to peace. Richard stood by the doorway. Watching them, he smiled faintly, knowing that love, when broken, doesn't have to end. Sometimes it learns to breathe again. The night settled gently around the house. The piano played on. The same song that once carried sorrow, now carrying something new. Something honest, and as the stars began to rise outside, Emma looked at Daniel and whispered, "Maybe this time, we'll learn to play it right." He smiled back, his hand finding hers on the keys, and together, they began again. Slowly, imperfectly, beautifully. The music rose softly through the house, not as a story of betrayal anymore, but of forgiveness, fragile, real, and full of hope. And for the first time in a long while, the house felt like home again, filled not with silence or guilt, but with the sound of two hearts learning to heal, one note at a time.